go to Mayor David Ayers from Waimakariri first of all.
Kelvin, I've got a couple of questions. I just want you just clarify for me and for our community that these rejuvenation events you talk about, is a possibility on that Kaiapoi fault off the Waimakariri mouth?
So I'm just going to repeat the question. I'm not sure everybody heard that. The question is about the so-called rejuvenation effect, which I think is not the term I would use. It's kind of the sleep interruption effect or whatever. Yes. But you're talking about the Kaiapoi fault, and you're saying, is there an increased likelihood of a rejuvenation event, for want of a better description, on the Kaiapoi fault?
Stephen, you? I think one small comment is that the most recent events have probably, because their movement direction has probably de-stressed the Kaiapoi fault a little bit, but that may not be that's one small comment in that.
So the setting for Waimakariri is that you've got some active faults which are similar in terms of their location and displacements, as we saw in the Darfield event in September. Those are the structures that are onshore, and if you take the Cust Ashley structure and extend it offshore, then you run into the Pegasus Bay Kaiapoi structures. So probably we're seeing a similar style and geometry of faults to the northern end of the Canterbury Plains as we do coming through Christchurch from Darfield and now going offshore. I think what's shown in the offshore data is that these faults are short. There are a lot of short segments, there's a lot of linking, and as we've had repeated ruptures, we've loaded areas around the tips of the faults, and that's what's propagating the rejuvenation events that Kelvin's been mentioning. So the question that you've really asked is this likely now to trigger something on the Kaiapoi structure? Well, the first thing is we don't know what the state of stress is on the Kaiapoi fault, but it's probably a fault that has been more active than the structures to the south, and therefore it may not even be close to maximum stress levels for it to rupture. So that's the first thing. The other thing I could say is that our studies that we've done onshore suggest that the faults onshore rupture on average about every 3,000 to 5,000 years, so it's much more frequent than what we're seeing to the south. And that possibly means also that the structures at the northern end of Pegasus Bay are not in a state of stress. That means they're ready to go. So there are a lot of ifs and buts. At the moment, the activity hasn't migrated right up to the Kaiapoi structure. It is dispersing, and that's also good news. It is going to the east. It's connecting through linking faults. So we can't put any certainty around answers for you, but I think that there is some evidence to suggest that that's maybe a less likely scenario, if that helps.
The second question, I think you really answered that, and that is, after the September quake, there were a number of aftershocks centred in the Oxford area, and there are quite a few faults in that area. You're suggesting, therefore, that there's not going to be too much stress on those faults like at the moment, and the movements away from the area.
No, because in the Oxford area and the Porter's Pass, going along the range front right up to Mount Grey, we've got the Porter's Pass fault zone, which is a very much more active, large-scale fault system. It's not at all surprising, given the sort of stress halo, if you like, that we have around the Darfield event, that we will get aftershocks being triggered some distance away, and in particular around Mount Oxford, which is a particularly complex geologic structure. We're not surprised to see activity where some of these faults come together and connect. It's also one of the more active fault zones in terms of sort of long-term activity in Canterbury. We've had a number of magnitude 5 and 4 events over the last few decades there. And that's normal background seismicity for that area. So I don't think there's anything to be read into having a few triggered and there's only relatively few triggered aftershocks in response to the Darfield event up to that sort of distance. You're getting out towards the kind of maximum extent of influence, if you like, of that stress change that happened following the magnitude 7.
Okay, I'd like to maybe just grab some of the media questions, because time is getting on, and for the community board members and others, we've got a bit more time to come back to your questions, but I want to deal with any of the media questions that you have. So Any of the journalists over here? Got any questions? Okay, there's one over here. George, just briefly.
Yeah, this for Prof. Pettinger. You had suggested last year that it's a better idea to buy one of those seismic tested machines you had borrowed from Canada. So have you got one, or are you still borrowing?
We don't have one. It's quite a major investment, and it would require careful planning as to not only the purchase of it, but also the use of it. I mean, there's no point in having something in the cupboard if you can't afford to run it. We have been looking at, if you like, a business model as to how this might work, and that discussion will be ongoing. In the meantime, we don't have the capability that we had from the Calgary equipment, but we have been doing some more shallow investigations using the seismic equipment that we have in the department, which is providing some additional sort of infill data, if you like, at the present time. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so let's deal with some of the questions from elected reps that you are bringing to us. So, go for it. Yeah. No, Pauline, sorry, and then I'll move along.
Just a question a lot of people are asking, liquefaction and the huge amount of silt that's emerged, people have a feeling there's nothing left down there. What is the response to that, please?
Not Jacka, this is definitely a question for you.
So the question was around liquefaction, and the community members saying, you know, can there be anything left? And I guess the subsequent question to that really is, well, what size of event would tend to trigger further liquefaction? If you can tell us something about that.
So certainly it's quite alarming as you walk down the street to see these huge potholes that have opened up in the street. What's driving those large sinkholes that you see is actually the water pipes that have burst and blasted out the material. If you think about how the ground's behaving, that ground's turned to a liquid and it's being squeezed out of the ground through cracks. And you can't squeeze things out of cracks if there's big air voids down there. They'll just fill up the voids instead. And so the sand that's come out gets expressed as settlement of the entire ground going down. And so we measure that with the LiDAR, with the survey from the air, which tells us how much the ground is settled. And that's information that gets used in assessment of areas, and you can use that information to see how your land's been damaged as well. So
does that therefore mean that when huge amounts have come out, that the land will settle at a much lower level than it originally was?
That's right. So there's parts of Christchurch that are some hundreds of millimetres lower than they were 2 years ago, because the land surface has dropped as that material has been taken away.
So do we have that information of where those areas are?
Yeah, so if you look on the CERA website, there's the presentations that have been done at the land zoning briefings, and there's a picture there, a multicoloured picture, that shows areas where there's been more and less ground settlement.
Has anywhere dropped to below sea level?
I'm not sure actually, but I wouldn't think so. No.
Roger, is that anything, or Minister Brownlee? I mean, the question was if any areas drop below sea level. I'm certainly not aware of that. Are you aware of any? Yeah. And that's, I mean, those are the red zones primarily. Okay. So one of the reasons that they're red zones. Ruth Dyson.
Thanks, Bob. Can I first of all thank you for calling this briefing? I think it's been really helpful to everyone. I'm not sure about the timing. Lots of people missed it, but I think the fact that it's going to be on the City Council website is going to be hugely helpful to people. Rumours start in a vacuum of information, and today has helped to fill that vacuum of things, so I think it's been really helpful. Kelvin mentioned about the 23rd December events not triggering any insurance concerns, I think was the phrase he used. Kelvin, I'm really interested about the impact of the 23rd of December on other decisions that are being made by the Council and CERA in relation to the review. It's not your question, not your question, Kelvin. Right. You'll be very relieved to know. I want to know if those events have triggered reconsideration of any timeframes in terms of zoning. You know, what is happening with the review of parklands, for example? What about the white zone, orange zone timeframes? What about the rockfall risk, cliff collapse decisions and the life risk model? What impact has 23rd of December had on them, and where are we with those timeframes?
That's I guess, probably a CERA question.
Timing hasn't changed on the orange stuff, all the waste involved with the specific concern. The part that we go to a period of 8 weeks, we're confident we get time.
So that's still under review. The Parkland's decision is still being reviewed.
We've said we'll get back to those people within that period of time. Yes.
Okay, and the life risk model determination for the people who are red stickered and out of their houses. Has it made any difference?
No, I don't think it has. Not as far as I'm aware. No.
Time frames for that model being determined.
I think Council will have a better answer to that one. The life risk model, Bob.
Look, I'm sorry, I can't give you a clear answer on that at the moment. I don't know that it has gone any further ahead from our perspective, but I think the key thing is that it comes back in that time frame. As I understand it, it's something which is of particular interest to the government in terms of where that rests because of the potential impacts for other areas in New Zealand.
It's a real interest to the people who can't live in their houses too.
Yeah, and I think the response to that is that from our point of view, everybody is working as hard as they can to get that information quickly, and I think Roger's given us an assurance that the timelines that we're currently committed to are going to remain. So that's an 8-week time frame approximately. Yeah. So moving along.
Thank you.
Sorry, no, I'll be there in a moment, Gary. Yes.
Linda Stewart, Burwood Pexus Community Board. My question is also about parklands, and in yesterday's paper, I think it was, Mike Jacka seemed to diffuse the need for a reassessment of parklands, and residents there are naturally very concerned. So could we have clarification on that? There is going to be a reassessment, or is it just a maybe?
Well, what I've just heard is that, sorry, Roger.
We said there will be a reassessment, and we expect that committed within the next few weeks.
Great, thank you.
Sorry.
My name is Paul Martin, Spring Heathcote Community Board. There's a lot of concern in the community about hydraulic fracturing or fracking, and the Christchurch City Council has asked for a moratorium. But what's your scientific view on the risks of fracking in Canterbury?
Kind of probably drawing a long bow in terms of the preparation for our meeting today, but I guess the question is, I don't know if you can even have a go at that one, the concern around the process of fracking and what that might do.
That MED and other government agencies are taking a view on fracking in the New Zealand situation. It's very much into petroleum exploration, not really into earthquake space at all.
Given that it's been linked with earthquakes in places like Ohio and England.
Well, look, what I'd like to do is I think that's a question that we clearly can't get a clear answer for you at this moment. It is a question of concern for a lot of people, and I would like to acknowledge that. But I think I'd like to come back to the primary issue that we have in front of us today, which is the recent earthquakes, the overall vision of what is going on, which I think we've had explained to us, and what might our future hold. So